Well, good afternoon, listeners. Happy Friday. You're listening
Thank
to
you.
Lament of Hope podcast, and I'm your host, Danielle Richardson. And I am very, very happy and excited to get to speak to Katherine Paterson. Many of you know her as the author of Bridge to Terabithia, which has been turned into a film and won a Newbery Award, and she's written more than 40 books, known for several of them. And she actually just shared with me that she just turned 92 and that she came on this podcast a day after her birthday and didn't realize how much she'd be celebrated, so she hopes she doesn't fall asleep. So we're gonna try to keep interesting questions to keep her awake. Um, but Catherine, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Danielle. It's fun to be on. I hope it will be fun for both of us.
Catherine, I want to ask you to start out, what book that you have written are you most proud of that came out the way you really wanted it to?
I think the book I'm most proud of because it was so hard to write and I wasn't sure I would ever get it done. And I had, I'd won the Newbery, I'd won the National Book Award for um, Master Puppeteer. I won the Newbery for Bridge. I won the National Book Award and got an honor book for Gilly Hopkins. And now I was trying to write another book. And I thought, oh, uh, how can I write another book now? I should just quit while I'm ahead. And I had started writing it when I lived in Maryland, and we moved in the middle of writing the book to Norfolk, Virginia, and my mother was dying. And it was just a very, very difficult. All my children were upset because they couldn't remember any home except the one they had lived in Maryland. And my husband had started a new job, so he was never home. and I was there surrounded by boxes and unhappy children. And I thought, I will never get this book done. And even if I get it done, it's not going to be any good. And so I think the reason I'm so proud of it is because when I finally got it done, I thought, by gum, I've done it. And part of it was just finishing it, which I wasn't sure I could ever do. And part of it was because I was trying to write something that was very painful in a time of a lot of pain. And yes, that's the one I'm proudest of, Jacob If I Left.
I'm sorry, can you say the title one more time?
Jacob, have I loved?
Okay, and
So
that's the second one that won the Newbery Award, right?
yes, it did,
Okay.
which was unbelievable to me because I remember I said to Timor Cruz, who was the chair of the Newberry Committee, she called me up. And I thought she was calling about a talk I was supposed to give in Wisconsin. And I said, I've never heard from that person I'm supposed to contact in Wisconsin, who's supposed to contact me in Wisconsin about my talk. She said, I'm not calling you about that. I'm calling you because Jacob I Love is this year's Newbery Award. I said, you got to be kidding. And she said, Catherine, I would not kid about something like that. But it was a little hard to believe.
Were you close to your mom?
Yes, although we had, like most mothers and daughters, we had our differences. Politically, we were very different. Um, she was a big Richard Nixon fan, and I was not by any means. Uh, I said to my husband, the only thing that Richard Nixon could do to lose my mother is to uh, take somebody besides Pat to Florida or start cursing. And sure enough, when the tapes revealed that he was a terrible cusser. Uh, my mother lost faith in Richard Nixon. She said, she never said it to me, but she said it to my brother-in-law. She said, well, Catherine tried to warn us. Richard Nixon did it for me. I didn't, there was no way I could have convinced her, but uh, expletive deleted did it for my mother. And you're too young to remember those days or to even be born during those days.
Do you, what's your favorite memory with your mom?
Well, the one that really sort of was formative for me, um, when we lived in Winston-Salem, had been refugees from China because of the war. And the church that employed my father, the church people were very nice to us. And so my mother kept inviting people for tea, and she would do Chinese tea because that would be different. And we had this antique box. It was about that big square and had sections in it of beautiful china, porcelain
Hmm.
sections. And she would put some different goodie into each of the sections. And she would put in at least one or two things that Americans would not think were strange, but she would also put uh, things that were typically Chinese. And I was trying to be very helpful. And so I took the ladies had sort of emptied out various sections. So I took the box back into the kitchen to fill it. And when I came out of the kitchen, the big heavy door somehow swung back and hit the tray, and it went dashing to the floor. And these beautiful porcelain inserts, inserts were in pieces on the
Hmm.
floor. And of course, I was devastated. And my mother, of course, heard the crash and she came back to the kitchen. She didn't even look on the floor. She looked at me in the face and she said, are you all right?
Hmm. Wow.
And I thought, I, when I have children, I'm never going to forget. There is nothing more precious than a child's feelings. And she wanted to make sure that I was all right. And then when I started crying because I had broken this very precious thing, she said, oh, Daddy will probably be able to glue it together.
Well,
Don't worry about it.
she sounds
And
like a, oh, I was gonna say she sounds like a very kind mom.
she was a kind mom, even if she didn't have good politics, or according to me. No, and she was kind to, she always looked for the best in people, which I found really lovely. And I think, that's the way we all should live because nobody's totally evil. There's always, if you look long enough, there's something in each person that needs recognition and respect and love. And I think when our politics is so divided, we can't seem to see anything good in the people we don't approve of, and we can't see anything. Well, I mean, we're just devastated if we find anything less than good in the people that we think are great, and
Yeah.
it's very sad. Instead of letting people be human beings and loving them simply because they're human beings.
Is there a particular person or a time in your life when you found it really hard to love somebody?
Yeah, my brother's second wife. We will not go into that. she, she has left us left this world, and I, I'll never know why she was the way she was, but she was a very difficult person for me to love.
Did you ever kind of resolve it or no?
No.
Hmm. You know, you were talking earlier about China, and when I was reading about your life, you'd been to China, you'd been to Japan. Did you like one of the countries better than the other? Did you like China better or Japan?
Well, of course, I was born in China, and that was my home.
Yeah.
Uh, and and while I was living in China, the Japanese uh, declared war on China, and so uh, we the war started when we were away from our home. We were in the mountains, supposedly on vacation, and when the bombing began, and that was not too far from where we were, we had to black out our windows, and it was very scary. And then we were evacuated that winter to the United States, which is the first time I'd been in the States. And then we went back after the Japanese had occupied most of eastern China. So then we lived under Japanese occupation, which was very frightening uh, because the occupying soldiers were not kind for the most part. Uh,
What did they
and
do?
Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of the rape of Nanking, but that sort of
Yeah.
describes a lot of what was going on. And so as a child, I hated and was terrified of the Japanese. And I never expected to go to Japan. But in seminary, I had a friend who was Japanese, and I loved her. And knowing my past, she said, if you give the Japanese people a chance, I think you would come to love them. And it was a lot of stuff that I don't want to go into. You said I didn't have to say everything, but I went to Japan with under the Presbyterian Church, and I worked with uh, 11 tiny churches in on the island of Shikoku after 2 years in language school. And the wonderful thing about that was that I was loved by people I thought I hated.
Hmm.
And their love for me, of course, in turn made me love them. And I just think that's probably a lesson. It would be wonderful if everybody would have the opportunity to be loved by people they thought they hated. Uh, very hard to hate people who love you.
What was the first gesture that you remember really touching you that they did?
Well, for one thing, they felt that they needed to take special care of me because I was a young single woman, which meant that my parents were probably not very good because by that time they would have found a husband for me. And they hadn't found a husband for me, but had let me go across the world alone. And I kept trying to tell them I had very good parents, but that's just not the way we did it in America. But you know, they really worried about me, and when I went to each of these little churches to speak, I usually stayed in the home of uh, either the pastor and his wife or one family in the church. And they were just so kind and just went out of their way to make me comfortable and to um, always tell me how good my Japanese was. And of course, I knew how good or poor my Japanese was, but it was just always trying to support and to make me comfortable and to make me feel good about myself
Hmm.
when I was with them.
And when you talked about speaking at churches, because you were a missionary, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What would you talk about?
Well, I did whatever the pastor wanted me to do.
Okay.
Uh, and they weren't, some churches I actually preached, which was horrifying to my mother, who was very conservative and didn't think women should preach. I said, well, I stand up there and sometimes I have on a robe and I read the scripture and then I talk about it. That's kind of like preaching, isn't it? Some of them wanted me to work with the Sunday school teachers um, with, more innovative, uh, innovative teaching methods. And some of them wanted me to have a class for young people. Uh,
Hmm.
there was a great desire to learn English, and so sometimes they wanted me to do an English Bible class so that the young people who wanted to learn English would come uh, and just get the Bible on the side while they were trying to learn conversational English. Um,
Hmm.
but um, and sometimes I taught the class in Japanese, which was something of a challenge. But uh, by the time I left, my Japanese was pretty good for a foreigner. But it's very, very poor now after all these years with no opportunity to keep it up.
Do you did you like always want to be a missionary, or was that something that just
Well, my parents were, and so I knew the kind of life. Um, I couldn't when I was hmm, people, kids when I talk in schools, they said, "Did you always want to be a writer?" And I would say, "No, I never thought I would be a writer, but I wondered. I didn't know at your age whether I wanted to be a missionary or a movie star because I
Hmm.
was very much of a little show off. I love to act." And and so
So how did
I
you go?
did.
You just went the missionary route because your parents had done it before?
No, I, I'm sure that that made me think about it.
Sure.
It didn't make me decide on it. I mean, I really felt that that's what I wanted to do, and and my hope was, and my faith was that was God was what God was calling me to do, and I thought I would spend my life that way. And then I met John Patterson, and I my life took a turn at that point. That seemed the right thing to do at the time. And and then the church, there's some denomination asked me to write uh, curriculum. I had a professor in seminary who asked me if I'd ever thought about becoming a writer,
Hmm.
and I said, "Oh no, I wouldn't want to add another mediocre writer to the world." And she said, "Well, maybe that's what God is calling you to be." And I didn't think God needed a lot more mediocre writers. So I didn't become a writer at that point, but she got me my first writing job, um, writing actually curriculum for the church school. And I thought by the time that it was a little book, and by the time that was published, I had all these little children. I knew I wasn't going to go back to teaching or uh, anything that would take me outside my home. So I thought, well, I could be a writer. And then I spent 7 years trying to sell something before my first novel was finally published.
Wow. That's perseverance. You didn't give up, huh?
Well, I said to my son David, who is a writer, I said, well, okay, you need two things. You need talent, and I do not doubt that you have talent. You have plenty of talent, but you also need perseverance. And I
Hmm.
said, the world is full of people with talent, but the number of people with perseverance is very um, rare. So if you have both, you'll succeed. So,
Was the writing, you think, the hardest thing for you to persevere in life, or was there another um incident or trial you went through that you found the hardest to persevere in?
well, I don't. That's interesting. Um, I mean, I've had, of course, trials, and I had cancer, and pretty much children were small, and I had to face that. Um, but obviously, I, I didn't persevere, but I lived. I had a good surgeon, and I survived. Because that was 1974, which makes it uh, what 70 years ago, uh,
When,
6 years, 6 years ago.
what was the cancer?
I had breast cancer. Um,
How did you find out about it?
well, my uh, family doctor had sent me to a surgeon because he was a little concerned, and I had gone to him for some time, and then one day his expression on his face changed, and he discovered it. But he was a wonderful surgeon who never had any trouble since. Um,
Was it like a mastectomy that the surgeon did,
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
okay. How did that feel? Because I've talked to a few people who have had a mastectomy or a double mastectomy from breast
Mm.
cancer, and some took it better than others. Um, like for you, did you feel like it was a loss of being
Oh
a
yeah,
woman
oh
in
yeah.
any
You do.
way?
I yeah. I'm sure you do, and I'm sure I did. But it's been so long ago, and I've been so grateful to have lived a long life that it's not a part of regret or sorrow or whatever anymore.
Hmm.
And I just, I think Dr. Gould made the right decision. You know, that if he'd just taken the cancer out and tried to restore the breast or whatever, I might not be alive today. I think
Yeah.
he, I think, I think he was absolutely right in what he did. And what, the thing that was most concerning for me at the time was leaving my children. I mean, I knew my husband, and there would be women lined up around the block to grab him the minute I was out of the way.
Oh,
He was very handsome and very nice, but the children, I thought, you know, I don't know. I mean, my successor might be a much better mother, but I can't believe she loved these children the way I love them. Well,
were they young at the time?
yeah.
Do you remember when you were going through that? I mean, because you were talking earlier about faith and being a missionary, but I would think when cancer hits you, suddenly your faith kind of can be shaken up.
Mm.
Did you like, did your faith become more real to you then, or did you find it was more empty than you thought it would be? Or,
No, I think, well, if you remember when I got out of the hospital, and Dr. Gould was not one of these people that you had uh, in and out surgery with. So I was in the hospital almost 11 days.
oh wow.
And and I got out on Palm Sunday. And I remember it was sort of a feeling of resurrection, you know, at Holy Week for me. Uh, it was very powerful.
Because did you find out that week that the cancer was gone?
Well, I mean, you never know. I mean, it had been taken. My breast had been was taken, but uh, and there seemed to have been no spread to the lymph nodes or anything. So um, I would go back every 6 months, I think, for checkups for many years.
Hmm.
And I remember every time I'd go back to the hospital, I'd stop at the chapel just to say thank you.
After you saw the doctor or
after
before?
I saw after I saw the
After.
doctor.
What is, can you like, what do you believe about God? Because I know you mentioned like Presbyterian and I know you mentioned what you grew up as, but now that you're 92 and you've lived life, and I mean, what, if someone asked you like what your faith is, what would you say?
God is love, and and that's for everything and everyone.
I guess, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I'm looking out at the mountains of Vermont. This I've been given the gift to live in a very beautiful place, and I think a lot of people think they live in a very beautiful place, and it might be very different from mine. Um, but I think we started out talking about seeing, well, it's almost like seeing the presence of God. I mean, the Creator loves the creation. And I know that because I love my books. I love my characters in my books.
Hmm.
And that seems to me such a tiny shadow of the immense, unmeasurable love that God has for us, which we know in his, I mean, the only way he could show us how much he loves us was by becoming a person and going through all the trials of being a person and dying the worst possible death as a person. And then as rising from the dead to show us that death doesn't have the last word. Sin doesn't have the last word. God has the last word
Hmm.
in each of our lives. Does that help? I mean, it's very hard, isn't it?
Oh, I think you said it beautifully. I was gonna say I love the comparison you made with you and your books. I think that's it's so interesting to think that way when you're saying that, kind of like you're the creator of your books. It's like God is the creator of man, and so you can kind of see you love your books so much and you put so much effort into writing them. And it just is a great analogy, I think, for what you were trying to say.
Well, thank you. I mean, it seems like a very meager analogy, but it's, I mean, it's what I know best, I guess.
You know, is there anything you regret not doing being 92?
Oh, my. Oh, regret. Oh, regret being. Mm. Well, I think this is very silly, but when my husband died and he was sick for, a terrible thing called multiple systems atrophy,
Hmm.
which meant that he was losing use of various systems on and on. And, and he said once, I don't mind dying. I just hate dying inch by the inches, which is exactly what he was doing.
Mm.
But, after he died, I, I couldn't mourn his death because he was so ready to go and he was so tired of not being able to use his body in the way. I mean, he had been strong and athletic, and he'd been the one who cared for everybody else, and now he was helpless and being cared for. And so, in a way, I had to be grateful that he was released from that, and he was quite ready to go. Um, but I regretted things, small things that I could have done. He always liked to see me in a dress. And once I moved to Vermont where it's cold, putting on a dress, and I hate pantyhose. I mean, I absolutely despise pantyhose.
Me too.
And if you put on a dress, you have to put on pantyhose, except in the summertime. And I thought, but I could have done that for him and made him, just made a day or so of his life happier by just doing the simplest little thing. And you think of things like that. Why didn't I do um, that simple little thing after somebody dies that would have made them happy? That would have cost me nothing,
Hmm.
except maybe just slight inconvenience. Um, so, big things. No, no, I think I've had such a full, rich life. I wouldn't have any, I mean, I don't have anything else I could cram into it. I'm quite aware of that, having had about a week of birthday celebrations. I was saying to a friend yesterday, I think everybody thinks that I'm going to die before next year because they're all giving me parties and gifts and carrying on.
I was gonna say, what do you miss most about your husband? Is there a certain thing you miss doing with him the most, or something he did or said?
Well, there was a couple that used to live next door to me here at the old folks home, and I would watch them go past my window, just talking and holding hands. And I thought, I was supposed to be able to do that, just being with the person that you love, and you have special things that only the two of you know, and the two of you share that you're not going to share with anybody else. Um, because it was for you too, and John was the first editor of all my books. He, when I thought I had a draft that was worth looking at, I wouldn't talk about the books while I was working on them, but then I would give it to him because I thought, well, spent a year or two writing this and not talked about it. And he's been very patient, so he has a right to read it first. And then he would come back with some questions or things, and I think, well, what does he know? And then very quickly I realized if I didn't pay attention to what he said, that my editor would come up with the same questions and concerns. So I smartened up and would revise before, for John's questions before I would send them to Virginia. I had the same editor for 40 years, which not many people have.
Wow. That's so funny. My husband's name is John.
Oh, is that right? It's a good name.
It's a good name, isn't it? It's solid.
Yeah. I have a son named John because I really love the name John. God is gracious, what it means.
Yeah, you know what's so funny, Catherine, is that my name means God is my judge, and John's
Oh.
name means God is gracious. And I was like, wow, the Lord planned that right.
Well, I'm glad you have graciousness to balance the judgment.
I right. Because I don't know about you, but I find I'm a more judgment personality, like more on
uh,
myself and on other people. I don't know, do you find that, are you like that or are you more easygoing?
I'm pretty easygoing.
You're
Uh,
easygoing.
yeah, but I'm old. It,
Well, were you
I
easygoing when you were younger?
not not nearly as much. Not nearly as much. I was much more judgmental when I was younger. But I think when you get old, one thing is you get to know yourself pretty well. And I certainly, when people start telling me, and they on your birthday, they're going to tell you all these wonderful things about yourself in case they forget to do it before you die. And I think, you know, it's just almost funny to me because I know myself very well. And I know that God is gracious in my life in a way that um, I can never be thankful enough for. Uh, and his, his mercy endures forever, and uh, his mercy is everlasting, and his grace endures forever. I don't know, something like that. And so I'm just very grateful for my life and to be loved and to be allowed to love. Uh,
Was there something, though, that someone said at your birthday that you knew was not true about yourself?
yeah, my adopted granddaughter telling me I was the most humble person. Which I know is not true. I mean, she must not know any humble people, but there's a lot of pride and still, you know, a lot of judgment still there. It's just I'm more aware of it and try to check it. Mm.
Yeah. Do you have a garden, Catherine?
A garden? No, I'm not a gardener. I find it a great defect of character that I've never really liked to garden. And of course, as a child, we were moving around so much that once my father had a wonderful garden in our home in Wyoming. I remember that very well. And he would get seeds from his farmer brother in Virginia. In those days, you could send seeds right through the mail, and he would plant. Uh, planted pecan trees. And I'm wondering if he took pecans to Vermont. I mean, to China, Virginia pecans. But then we began moving because the war kept us moving all the time. And he didn't really have another garden until they settled in Virginia many years later. And so I didn't grow up gardening. And my husband did, and he loved to garden. So he thought if you loved to garden and you loved him, then of course you would love to garden. Just hand me a hoe and my back starts hurting. And when I moved here, everybody would say to me, "Are you a gardener?" And I thought I was leaving Barry, so I would never have to garden again. And apparently, the person who owned my apartment before me was a great gardener, and she did all these wonderful things around here. Um, Sorry, folks, I'm going to be a sad disappointment. I have I have two potted plants that I'm very fond of, and that's my garden.
What hobbies do you have besides writing? Like, what do you like to do besides write?
Well, I love to read. I'm really more of a reader than a writer. In fact, when Virginia and John both died, I thought, well, those are my big supports, my husband and my editor. So maybe I'll just read. I finally, started writing. So I've written several books since. I don't have either one of them, but uh, I love to read and I love to do crossword puzzles. I'm a word person.
Yeah.
Uh, I have done some pastel painting, which I
Wow.
enjoyed. I'm not very good, and I've sort of given that up. But I did for a while. I enjoyed that a lot. Uh, but pastels are expensive, and I didn't really feel like I wanted to buy a lot more pastels when at this age.
What
But
about what's your favorite word?
bird,
Word.
word, word, word. Mm, I think grace.
Grace.
Mm. I mean, for the sound of the word, what would be a favorite sound of the word? Something with lots of L's, like lovingly or lovely. I think that has a nice sound.
Lusciously, maybe?
Lusciously. Oh, that's a nice sound. Yes.
It sounds kind of yummy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Much more so than nutritious.
Yeah. It's true. Well, Catherine, I want to say I'm so happy to have met you and talked. I wish, in some ways we lived close because you would be a perfect person to come and visit and talk to. Um, but thank you
It might
so
be fun,
much.
Danielle.
What?
That might be fun, but I can't go back to Lovettsville.
I know. I'm so sad you can't come, but um thank you so much for
Oh,
doing this, especially after all those parties and you just want to go to bed.
oh yeah. Well, I did. I did have a lot of fun yesterday, but I thought, phew, I'm glad I don't have a birthday every day.
Well, you rest well and thank you so much.
Thank you, and
Bye.
goodbye.